I think we're just about ready to get started here. So before we get going, just as a quick technology check for all of our in-person attendees. Thank you all for being here tonight. So we've got these gooseneck mics ahead of you. They should all be live now, so you don't need to mute or unmute the mics throughout the meeting. Just please make sure to project your voice towards the mic. You'll notice that a couple folks are sharing mics. And so with that, I will go ahead and start our recording.
Recording in progress.
And now I will just ask for a quick safety video to be played for our in-person attendees. Sorry, technical difficulties, folks.
I'm Mike Reese, and I'm the Dive Safety Officer here at the Oregon Zoo, and safety is a big part of my job. Some of the things we consider here is diver safety. I'm out here at the Oregon Zoo, and you're at the Metro Regional Center. The council chamber is located on the 3rd floor of this building. In the event of fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room, go down the steps to the 2nd floor, and exit through the main entrance by the reception desk and gather in the courtyard outside the entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the front desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue. Thank you.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you very much. We will call this meeting to order. I'm Brett Sherman. I am your fill-in chair this evening. Today is Wednesday, February 28th, 2024, and this is the Metro Policy Advisory Committee. Connor, if you would, please call the roll.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Sherman. So, starting with the roll, Commissioner Sharon Mirren. And by the way, as I go through the roll here, folks, and if you're still in the attendees list, please go ahead and put your hand up so that I can get you in the room faster. All right. Continuing on, we have Councilor Vince Jones-Dixon.
Here.
Thank you. I don't see Mayor Randy Lauer, but I do see his alternate, Mayor Kurdna, so I will go ahead and promote them up. All right, so Mayor Kurdna will appear on screen in just a second here. All right, continuing on, Director Terry Pre-Grigsby.
Here.
Omar Khattab.
Here.
He's present. Good, thank you.
Here.
Thank you, good evening. Commissioner Mark Schull.
Here.
Mayor Joe Buck, I don't think has joined us yet. All right, Mayor Denise McGriff.
Sorry, present.
Thank you. Commissioner Sherry French.
Here.
Ed Gronke is present. Commissioner Pam Treese.
Here, and special thanks to Brett Sherman for taking over tonight. Thank you, Brett.
Mayor Steve Calloway.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Tim Rosner.
I am here.
Thank you. Director Gordon Hovey's.
Present.
Luis Nava.
Present.
Director Thomas Kim.
Here. Thanks, Connor.
Thank you. Director Kirsten Green.
Present.
Councilor Glenn Young.
Here.
Thank you. I do not see Mayor or Councilmember Ty Stober. Emerald Bogue. I don't think has joined us yet. All right. Councilor Garrett Rosenthal.
Here.
Councilor Mary Nolan.
Right here. Nice to have you all in our house.
And finally, Vice Chair Brett Sherman.
I am here. Thank you very much, Connor. I appreciate that. And so, Commissioner Treese, you know, I can fill in for you, but I can never fill your shoes. So I'm glad you are doing well. I think starting off today, I'm going to pass this off to Roger for a quick membership update.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to provide just a quick description of the current unusual status of the seat on the committee held by the special districts of Washington County, which is the reason why we're delaying the vote tonight on the consent agenda items. Instead of doing that tonight, we're going to bump that out and do it in March, just to make sure we don't have any possible procedural problems. So basically, the situation is that we have a dispute currently about who is the properly appointed member of the Washington County Special District group and the representative for that seat. Back in December, the Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue Board of Directors took a vote to offer their seat on this committee to the other special districts of Washington County. My understanding is that that seat has been held by TVF&R since, I think, 2016. So in January, the Special District Association of Oregon initiated a process by which they reached out to the other special districts and started to figure out an appointment process for who would become the next representative of those districts. So that process resulted in, that process resulted in the Special District Association notifying Metro earlier this month that the Washington County districts had jointly appointed Miles Palacios as the new member and Jim Duggan as the alternate. About a week later, Mr. Hovies filed objections to the process by which the new appointments had been made under state public meetings law and under the MPAC bylaws. So because we have a currently pending dispute regarding who holds the special district seat, the MPAC chair and the Metro Attorney's Office reached out to Mr. Palacios and Mr. Hovies with a request that the seat remain unoccupied for purposes of the meeting this evening, in the interest of good governance and decorum, and I think more importantly, to allow time for Metro to confer with the Special Districts Association about their process and hopefully confirm that their process conformed with the Metro bylaws. So Mr. Palacios did agree not to attend tonight's meeting. Mr. Hovies did not and is attending the meeting, obviously. So because it's not entirely clear at the moment who the correct proper member of the committee is, we decided not to have a vote component of tonight's meeting, move that over to next time, and tonight's agenda items will be informational only.
Very good.
No.
Dispute is that I was failed to give proper public notice
Very good.
of this election selection process.
Very good.
Notified, failed to be notified. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the update. We'll move into public communications. And with that, a quick script. As a reminder, public comment may be submitted in writing and will also be heard by electronic communication. Written comments should be submitted electronically by emailing legislativecoordinator@oregonmetro.gov. Written comments received by 4 p.m. on Tuesday, February 27th have been provided to the committee in advance. If you've not already signed up to testify, either in person, you can sign up virtually by raising your hand. Those calling in on the phone can raise their hands by dialing *9. Those using the Zoom app on their cell phone or computer can raise their hand by selecting the raise hand button along the bottom control bar. Connor, do we have anybody signed up to testify this evening?
Thank you, Vice Chair Sherman. We have not had anybody sign up in advance to testify, nor have we had any written testimonies submitted. I'll just give folks in our Zoom or physical audience another second to put their hand up if they would like to sign up now to testify. All right, and seeing none.
Very good. Thank you very much. We will move on then. So for our council update this evening, we get Metro Councilor Mary Nolan, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My update is taken over by 2 agenda items because a good bit of what the council is exerting the Metro Council is exerting its energy and time on are our Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Program and the Urban Growth Management Decision. So I won't go into detail because the teams here can handle those. I will mention, though, with WPES, and I don't know if Marta was going to bring this up, besides the facilities plan, we are close to concluding a task force recommendations on adjustments to the way we determine fees. That recommendation will come to the council, and we will consider it in time to provide local governments time to we'll approve a new policy, implement it, and still have time to implement it into your local collection rates. We know that that's tight, and we know that that's a hard thing for local governments to get out with enough adequate notice for your folks. I can't remember if we mentioned last month that the council did refer a significant construction bond measure for the zoo that will be on the ballot this May. Significant improvements to the zoo that are aimed at improving safety for animals, employees, and visitors, augmenting our endangered species programs, making the physical grounds more accessible to mobility challenged visitors. And you and your voters will all have a chance to look at that this May. My colleague has right hot off the press information from Salem, so I'll defer to him on that.
Thank you, Councilor Nolan. Just a brief update. I got a call.
No, don't touch it.
I got
Is
a
that
call.
working?
I think it might be turned off. There you go. Oh, okay. I did that. My fingers don't work. I got a call from Salem just a little before this meeting. Of concern to a lot of the small cities is the governor's land use bill, and that has now moved to Ways and Means without much objection. The major changes are reduce the 75 and 150 to, I think, 50 and 100 acres. That's still in there. There's some changes to the variance process, which, you know, not everybody's going to be happy with, but apparently a little bit more restrictions on that. And then, of course, we all know that the money for infrastructure was reduced by about $150 million. And it's more, rather than competitive, it's going to be more allocated to specifically the Tualatin Valley Water District is going to get some of that. The Prosper Portland is going to get a good-sized chunk. The Albina District is going to get some. Beaverton is going to get some for its central area. And I think it's the Oak Grove Water District is going to get some. So it's going to be more allocated in this area rather than something to apply for. So I think that's the, and 75 million, it's going to be reduced $75 million in assistance for middle housing. So that's going to be in there. And yeah, I think that's about it. It's probably pretty much a done deal at this point in time.
Very good. Thank you very much. Councilor Nolan, anything else?
No.
Okay, very good.
And I'll just note, it looks like Director Kim has his hand up.
Oh, I apologize. I cannot see that online. Please.
Hey, no worries at all. Tom Skim from the TriMet board. Just a quick two updates from TriMet. We're making great progress on the Better Red project, and the current disruptions on the red and blue line will wrap up this Sunday ahead of our opening of the all-new Gateway North Station on March 4th. And we're also beginning what should be the final major service disruption on this project with a 9-day bus bridge on the west side. And this project is on track, and we're all looking forward to the completion of Better Red this August. And second, we welcomed our first of our 24 new battery electric buses to our yard. This will triple the number of our fully zero emission buses deployed by TriMet, and marks the next step in our plan for a fully zero emission future. Thank you all.
Very good. Let's just jump into member communications and updates. I see another hand up, and I apologize. My glasses are in the car, so I'm thinking that's maybe Sherry French with her hand up. Yes. Very good. Please.
Yes, thank you. Just for clarification, you just said Oak Grove. You thought it was Oak Grove. Is it Oak Grove or Oak Lodge?
Oak Lodge, you're correct.
Oak Lodge.
Thank you for the correction.
Okay. Thank you.
Very good. Any other member updates you'd like to share today? And online as well, of course, you can raise your hand virtually. I am not seeing any hands, so we will keep moving ahead. Moving into our first presentation item today is the Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Garbage and Recycling System Facilities Plan Update. That is a mouthful. So as you know, Metro is actively engaging partners on a long-range plan for facility investment that meets goals to reduce garbage, improve service quality and access, and keep services affordable. The Garbage and Recycling Services Facilities Plan will take a holistic view of the system and help clarify Metro's future role in the garbage and recycling system. November of 2023, Council had considered 4 draft scenarios to meet the values and outcomes of the System Facilities Plan and fill gaps in the regional system. Tonight, we've got project staff. We'll present a summary of stakeholder input and 4 scenarios and the next steps for developing preferred options. So with us today, Marta McGuire, Marissa Grass, and I think Luis Sandoval is here as well. So please, the floor is yours.
Yes, good evening. Thank you again so much, Vice Chair Sherman. Again, my name is Marta McGuire, and I'm Metro's Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Department Director, and I use she, her pronouns. We do like long titles, so bear with us. I have here with me Marissa Grass, our Strategic Engagement Advisor, and Luis Sandoval, Principal Planner, and we're pleased to be here with you today to talk about the Systems Facilities Plan, share what we heard on our engagements to date, and I'll just note that it's really wonderful to be here in person. I think the last time I was in person at MPAC was in 2018 when we were talking about the regional waste plan. So I've had the opportunity to see some of you in some virtual spaces, but it's really great to be here in person. So thank you for the time today to engage with you on this topic. If we go to the next slide, I just want to start just with a little background so we can shift gears into the garbage field. I want to start with a reminder of our department's primary mission, which is to protect people and the environment by keeping valuable resources out of the landfill and managing garbage and recycling safely. To fulfill this role, we work collaboratively with you, cities and counties, to plan for the region, and our work falls into the 3 key areas that are listed here. We manage 2 public transfer stations in the St. John's landfill and our delivery of regional garbage and recycling operations. In services and community investment, that includes our cleanup of garbage in communities and advancing waste reduction through grants and partnerships, as well as education services. We also work with cities and counties to reduce the impacts of products and waste through policy and regulation. Next slide. Our work is guided by the Regional Waste Plan, which is our long-range strategic plan that provides a framework for us to work with cities and counties and advance progress toward the regional outcomes that are listed here. This committee played a really important role in the development and adoption of this plan. The Systems Facilities Plan that we're going to be talking about today will provide key direction on how to achieve the goals and objectives by addressing existing infrastructure gaps in the garbage and recycling system. Next slide. When we talk about the garbage and recycling system, it includes the reuse, recycling, and garbage services that you see represented here. I'm a visual person, so I always like to have a graphic, and this really represents the level of complexity of the system that we have in the region. And as I mentioned, the System Facilities Plan is really designed to assess the existing gaps and identify where people lack services and present potential options for future investments in new facilities and services. Next slide. It's also important to note that this plan is focusing on one area in a larger life cycle framework for how we manage materials and products to protect people in the environment, which is featured up here. This life cycle approach, which is the underpinnings of the Regional Waste Plan, really provides us with a view to look at opportunities to reduce the impacts through the life cycle of a product, from the design and manufacturing that you see in that orange component through use to getting rid of it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Marissa Grass that's going to jump into the details of today's presentation.
Thanks, Marta. Like she mentioned, Marissa Grass, and I work in engagement. And today I'm going to cover...
Closer, please.
Closer? Is that better?
Thank you.
Uh-huh. So today I'm going to cover what we consider a mid-phase 3 update, covering what we've done, what we learned, and also what's next. I'm going to start with an engagement recap and cover key takeaways, and then we'll talk about what's next to choose a preferred set of investments. Next slide. This is the project timeline. In phase one, we worked with council to identify values and outcomes that were informed by the regional waste plan. And in phase two, we conducted a gap analysis. And now we're here in phase three, working to develop a preferred scenario. The purpose of today is really an update on the engagement work in phase three. And in November, council took a straw poll on the scenarios. And so today we're sharing what we heard from both council and from stakeholders. I'm going to start by giving a brief overview of the phases we've completed already. Next slide. So for me, Metro South really best illustrates the need for a system facilities plan. Metro South opened to the public on April 11th, 1983, more than a year before I was born. It was designed originally to host an incinerator, and the facility was expected to handle up to 800 tons of waste every day. So fast forward, and in the year preceding June 2022, Metro South processed over 329,000 tons of waste. That's a 12% increase. And I've learned a lot about the impacts of this from our site supervisor, Matt Tracy, who talks about operating an overburdened facility in a safe and efficient manner. He says, frankly, we do pretty well. However, to keep high-quality materials out of landfills, to have more space to separate out reusable and repairable items, and to ensure safety, including traffic flow, that redevelopment of the site is needed. Next slide. The values and outcomes really underscores the importance of achieving these goals for our community. So for example, they include excellent service, healthy people, and resource conservation. Next slide. And between September 2022 and June 2023, Metro used a combination of engagement and technical research to identify facility gaps in the regional reuse, recycling, and garbage system. Metro looked at 14 groups of facilities organized by the materials that they process and what customers they serve. So the two images here represent gaps for residential and also commercial customers. Next slide. As just one example, recycling depots can take a larger variety of items than what can be recycled curbside, but these depots are often far from community centers. So this is a photo of Metro Central, and you can see that folks have the opportunity to drop off items like e-waste or antifreeze. And although there are many facilities in the region that accept recyclable materials from residents, there's only a few that provide one-stop locations where people can take multiple types of materials. And based on the feedback received during phase two of this project and also in past projects, people in the region really value the convenience of having a single place that accepts multiple items for recycling. Next slide. In phase three, we did targeted engagement with stakeholders on the policy tools, whether that's building and renovating metro facilities, investing in private facilities, or new policies and programs. That would provide a range of options in the draft scenarios. And those draft scenarios were described in a discussion guide for the symposium. Next slide. So I'm going to start in the middle of the slide because the symposium was really the main event in this phase of engagement. The Reuse, Recycling, and Garbage Symposium was the department's largest in-person engagement event since COVID. It was attended by over 120 participants from community, local government, reuse repair nonprofits and businesses, and the garbage and recycling industry. The activities pre-symposium helped us to build the scenarios that were reviewed in the discussion guide, and post-symposium activities helped us to learn more from specific stakeholder groups. Next slide. We have held really key conversations with stakeholders early in the process as the project team was designing the scenarios. We met with local government representatives pictured here. This is from the education and outreach retreat where we had an opportunity to talk about how we could encourage reuse and repair as part of the system facilities plan with region-wide educators and also solid waste staff. Next slide. We also held a reuse and repair workshop where we met with a small group of nonprofits and businesses to talk about different ways the system facilities plan could support their work. So the scenarios each presented a different reuse or repair infrastructure in response to what we heard in this workshop. Next slide. The project team also conducted one-on-one interviews with private industry representatives, owners or managers of garbage and recycling businesses in the region. And we wanted to understand industry's needs and desired roles in developing future facilities that would fill the gaps and meet project goals. And we heard, just as one example, that there's generally low interest in owning or operating facilities that accept household hazardous waste. Next slide. Ongoing throughout this phase, we also met with the Community Advisory Group and Committee on Racial Equity to deepen our understanding of how the proposed scenarios could impact our community. This is a photo of the Community Advisory Group on a tour of Metro South. And they really helped us to come up with the benefits and challenges of each scenario. And in fact, we printed some of those in the discussion guide so that as stakeholders were reviewing the scenarios, they could also get a sense for community impacts. And next, we're going to play a short video just to give you a quick flavor for the symposium. We could maybe send a link to everyone if that would be easier. That's okay, Connor. Maybe we just send a link. Is that okay? That'd be good. There's just more photos of people participating, so we'll get you the link. But I do really like the words as well from Marisa's introductory speech. So next slide, please. And you'll have to go one more. Thank you. I do get really excited every time we share the video, and it's because as an engagement professional, it really warms my heart to see people at round tables. There's like Post-it notes and chart packs, and it's just been so long since we had done that, so the event still feels really special to me personally. The event was split in two parts. So first was the international panel, and then the engagement workshop. So during the workshop, we collected feedback in two ways, through a survey and at table discussions. And during the event, we had about 50 people take the survey. Next slide. There was also a series of tours for the international panel participants to visit and chat with local nonprofits and businesses. And I know that some of our counselors joined us for these. Next slide. And then we held follow-up workshops with audiences like Unite and Adelante, who are our Waste Prevention Civic Engagement Grant recipients. So one of our project managers, Luis, who's here tonight, is shown here presenting to Adelante at the end of January. And this workshop was held in Spanish, and the participants shared feedback about the ways they wanted to be involved in the future of the system. And we also met with representatives from the Metropolitan Mayors Consortium, and these audiences were invited to take the survey too. Next slide. And then we continue to meet with and engage with our waste prevention and environmental services staff, including frontline workers and also members of our equity change team. We had 60 staff take the survey, and we'll report on those results separately. But just quickly, staff supported the one-stop facilities that I mentioned earlier, and also had concerns about space and safety at existing facilities. Next slide. So on November 9th, Council took a straw poll to indicate their early preference for the different scenarios. And of those scenarios, we heard support for the distributed and no-build scenarios. However, it was with many, many caveats, including and especially how the facilities would support additional waste reduction. How do we support existing private or nonprofit folks in the system? How do we solve for geographic equity? And also underscoring the importance of safety. Next slide. And really, we heard the same thing from project stakeholders. So in the survey taken by the participants and during additional outreach, the distributed and no-build scenarios were also popular. However, 80% of the respondents indicated that they would like to make a change to their preferred scenario. Next slide. So quickly, the distributed scenario includes a network of distributed mid-sized facilities with separate facilities for public and commercial customers. Some of the things that people liked about the distributed scenario were the services available to the general public, and also how the scenario met the policy priorities for waste reduction, access, and affordability. And we heard specifically that improved access in Washington County and East Multnomah County was appreciated, as well as improved access metro-wide to reuse and repair as a way to reduce waste. And the distributed scenario provides an opportunity to bring together the community's desire for one-stop drop-off with the recycling depots that are envisioned as part of the Recycling Modernization Act. Other themes, capacity. So there was a question about if the smaller reuse hubs in this scenario would provide enough capacity, and also education and outreach, noting that this would be a shift from the status quo, and so additional education and outreach would be important. And some folks would also like to see the opportunity for education and outreach included at future facilities. Next slide. So noting that almost everyone would make changes to their preferred scenario, we looked at what aspects of each scenario were most popular. So you'll see there in the green that public facilities that include reuse and recycling centers is most popular, followed by a dedicated fee to invest in reuse organizations. And just highlight that even though the full service scenario was less popular for most stakeholders, two elements from that scenario are among the most popular. So the reuse mall and reuse hub were supported. Next slide. This slide shows the survey results for level of investment. And for me, the important takeaway on this slide is that for the stakeholders who took the survey, they really supported investment over none of the above. And in fact, over 80% of most respondents, the categories here were supportive of an additional $3 to fund the distributed scenario. And I just want to note here that that's $3 by 2040, so implemented over time. Industry respondents did have the most divergent responses from all of our survey participants, with about 30% of respondents indicated that they supported none of the options provided. But these folks, reported that they wanted zero increase. However, support for investment from industry stakeholders was still over 50%. Next slide. Metro also invited a tribal consultation with folks who have engaged with Metro's Tribal Affairs program. And we held meetings with interested tribes in late 2022, early 2023. And this led to an opportunity to partner with the Portland area office of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians for a community member conversation. So just quickly, what we heard from the initial consultation, we heard about protection of the environment, natural resources, archaeological, cultural, and historic resources. And then from the workshop, we heard about the impact of facilities on the environment and human health, and also an ask to do more to address plastic pollution and incentives for recycling at work, and also to work with the state on the implementation of the Recycling Modernization Act. Next slide. So in summary, we heard support for investing in facilities that separate commercial customers from members of the public, that include reuse and recycling centers, specifically the reuse mall and warehouse concept. Other investment priorities include investing in existing infrastructure, improving safety, stable funding for reuse infrastructure, and generally doing all of this while keeping costs down. Next slide. So next, the project team will work with council to create a preferred scenario using the engagement results that will incorporate what we heard. And as you know, the final combo of scenario elements, it doesn't need to be one scenario over another. It's expected to be a combination of components from different scenarios or elements that move forward into a draft plan in phase 4. Next slide. The project team is hard at work developing a range of options that meets council preferences and stakeholder feedback. And we imagine bringing that forward in 3 key areas. So public facilities, commercial facilities, and then reuse facilities and programs. And council will have an opportunity to discuss some of the trade-offs before selecting a preferred scenario. Next slide. So that wraps up the presentation. We have some discussion questions here for you tonight. We're curious if you have any questions for us on either what we did or what we heard. Is there anything from the engagement that stands out to you or aligns with what you're hearing from your community? And is there anything that you want to lift up as council is considering preferred scenario elements?
Very good. Thank you very much for the information. Appreciate that. And so I guess maybe one question just about the survey results from the stakeholders did very much lean toward the distributed kind of scenario, even across community, industry, local government. They all lean in that direction. And I know in one of the further charts it talked about how kind of the main priority in that scenario would be the services available to the public in that scenario was kind of the highest ranked aspect that was important. And I guess what I'm looking for a little bit of a granularity on is in that scenario, I'm assuming it's a subset of services that are available that are at that distributed function because every facility doesn't get to do everything. Does that provide, I mean, when we're trying to kind of do that versus kind of a full service scenario, does that give the general public the resources that they need? And then secondarily, I would assume that what I take away from this is proximity is the most important thing. Least drive time is like number one out of all of it. How far do I need to go? I know that if you're coming from Forest Grove or Troutdale right now, it's a really long drive. Mm-hmm. So it's a beautiful drive. It's a beautiful drive, absolutely. So I think what you alluded to is, we're not necessarily looking at just a single scenario. It's kind of taking the best of the best and really incorporating that into the solution. So as we look at relative pricing at the cost of each of these various scenarios, how do we kind of hone in on that? How do we deliver the best possible solution to residents, at a price point that makes sense?
I think there were 3 parts. So I heard just kind of diving into the scenario results on the distributed. And then I heard also about, and that kind of, proximity is important and what that looks like. And then the third piece was about cost and how we deliver like the best service.
Perfect, thank you.
Is that, okay.
And I think I might get lost between those 3, but
that's how I roll. I'm sorry about that.
No. So the public facilities under the distributed scenario are assumed to provide this basically the same services that existing metro transfer stations provide to the general public, plus more. So, for example, right now we have recycling depots at metro transfer stations, but there is no opportunity for people to leave donations for reuse. So these new public facilities, by separating them from commercial facilities, the theory is that we can build more distributed, so to get at the access part. We don't need as many commercial facilities to serve haulers as we need to serve the public. That is the theory behind that approach. And so the services, I would say, is pretty much the same as we have for the general public at existing transfer stations, including household hazardous waste, plus more materials for reuse. And then in the distributed model, we also had assumed that each of those public facilities would have a little space for reuse retail opportunities for 1 or 2 reuse organizations to be able to sell or provide used items on site. and a little space for warehousing, because that's one of the top needs that we heard from the reuse sector, which is sometimes they have large donations and they have to reject them because they don't have any space for warehousing. So in the distributed model, we went is an extreme version, right? So then there's distributed reuse retail, distributed reuse warehousing opportunities. But as you saw in the results, a lot of people either they missed that part of the distributed scenario, but it was very, very highlighted in the full service scenario where it proposes one regional reuse mall, one regional reuse warehouse. So those two items were very popular, well supported. And in terms of how to keep, I think you were reacting to the keeping everything affordable. That is always the challenge. Building new facilities requires investment. What we have done is try to show how much would it impact the average single-family garbage bill. So that's the $3 per month by 2040 compared to today. The baseline also shows an increase of I remember it's $1.30. So we're trying to be as comprehensive, showing what the likely impact of these investments would be.
So I guess then that kind of, for me at least, begs the question, as we were going through the process of looking for an alternate for like South Metro, and we were looking at kind of a large, facility somewhere in Clackamas area. I know that was a very complicated process. We're really concerned about kind of the impact of the footprint in that area. Is in the distributed model, is the impact smaller because we're looking at fewer people coming through, or is it going to be just as complex, just on a smaller scale?
Less complex in terms that it would require Metro to look for properties that are less, smaller. So that's the distributed is the mid-sized facilities, because industrial land, especially in the 20 acres or more category, is very hard to find anywhere across the region. And so the idea is that by separating them out, commercial facilities usually can be done with a smaller footprint than full service transfer stations, and public facilities. It's easier to keep traffic separate if they're separate, right? And so the idea is, yes, we would require smaller properties. I'm not sure about an overall smaller footprint, physical footprint. But the theory is, yes, we would look for smaller properties. It depends on what council approves in the end. Do we go and search for the smallest properties that we can, or do we anticipate for future growth?
Makes sense. I appreciate that. I see Mayor Callaway. I think your card is up next.
Thank you. So a few observations. I remember when it opened, back in 1983. I mean, it was my third year of teaching in Oregon City, and it's like, wow, that was a lifetime ago. But as I reflect on things, I think of now living, obviously in Washington County, and we don't have, this kind of service. And it is expensive through the private haulers and through the private transfer stations. And so when we talk about geographical equity, it's also a racial and economic equity issue as well. And I cannot stress that enough, not just for Hillsborough, which is the largest, most diverse large city in the state, but also for our neighbor Cornelius, which is, one of our highest percentage Latino cities in the state. And also, the comment that nobody wants to do, household hazardous waste. Yeah, we get it. And that's why we also get it on the sides of our roads. And that's why we get it down our storm drains. And so we have to have the geographical, the racial, and the economic equity. We have to be served in Western Washington County. And in the same way over in the East County to the same extent. Because we are on the edges, but we are major producers, and it makes it much, much harder. So here's, questions. with the 50 participants in the survey, I think 30 were from providers, and then the others were heavily represented in the, I think in the repair and the reuse. But it didn't feel like there was a lot just from the general public and just from regular folk. And so what, will there be outreach and additional efforts to engage the general public?
That's a great question, and appreciate you. Well, first, acknowledging the existing gaps. I think that's something that came through both in our technical assessment, but also from all of the different communities that don't have access to that service currently and feel those disproportionate impacts. As we narrow down the options, getting to the preferred scenario, we will be doing a larger public comment period to solicit to gather additional information and preferences. But we've really tried to do a lot of targeted engagement as a part of our overall engagement strategy to ensure that we are including the voices of those folks that are most impacted by the decisions that we're making.
Okay, thank you. And then recognizing with the different scenarios, and it may be kind of a, pulling in different components from the different scenarios, which then change the costs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would ask council as well as staff to make sure that detailed costs are shared before the development of the final recommendation. Because we as cities, we just kind of are forced to rubber stamp, if you will, and pass on the costs. So we are the ones that bear the phone calls and the emails, and we're the ones that get called out on social media when we raise the rates, even though we weren't really a part of the process. We're just at the end.
Absolutely.
So I would appreciate that from Metro Council and staff. And with that, recognizing time, and I know there's others, I'll pass.
Well, and I'll just note, our request is to come back to MPAC in July, once we've had this engagement with council in the spring, where the scenarios are really at the conceptual level of the world of opportunity, and we're trying to narrow that field more, and our engagement in May with council will help get us there, and along with that, we'll have more details on the financing that we can bring as a part of the discussion with MPAC in the summer before we get to that being fully finalized and adoption. Because agreed, this is a regional plan, and it's really important to make sure that we have your engagement and partnership in moving this forward.
Very good. Actually, I think next up, I see you, Mr. Hovey's 1 second. Mr. Gronkley, I think you were next.
Ed's got seniority over me.
He's a good-looking guy.
Go ahead.
Unmute.
I think you're on mute, Ed.
Yeah, you're on mute, Mr.
Mr.
Gronke.
Gronke, can you hear us? I think he may have a slow internet connection.
That should take care of it.
There we go.
Gotcha.
In an earlier life, I was a tool and die maker, and I learned, and I remember to this day, that there is nothing mechanical which cannot be repaired if it's broken. I think what concerns me so much is the makers, especially of small electronic appliances, seem to make them with the idea that when they're broken, you throw them away and buy a new one, rather than pay to have it repaired. They're not built to be repaired. My question is, does Metro intend to get involved in this process to any extent in order to make the manufacturers make these small appliances in such a fashion that they can be repaired?
Thank you so much for that question. That has been a part of our legislative agenda as it goes with regards to right to repair. You're correct. It's really important that we are looking what we would say like upstream to how can we design products so they may be either more durable, so they have a longer lifetime, or how they can be repaired. So that is a space that we have influence over in terms of advocating at the state level for legislative changes that would place additional requirements on manufacturers. And so that's work that we are continuing to advance.
Very good. Thank you for the response. We'll go to Mr. Hovey's next, and then Commissioner Shull afterwards.
Okay, Connor, am I good? Can you hear me?
You're
Okay,
on.
good. Thanks. I'm more of a clarification because I saw earlier in the PowerPoint presentation a picture. Looks like that the waste stations there are accepting, are they accepting like not only electronic equipment like computers, microwaves, ovens, which has electronic equipment in there? Are they accepting all those now?
Metro transfer stations, they do accept appliances and electronics, yes.
Okay. I'm a little selfish because I got stuff to take there, but I also want to clear it up just in case somebody else.
And for some there's a fee associated with them if they contain Freon, so refrigerators, freezers.
You can call 503-234-3000, the recycling information hotline, and also look at our website for more information on 234-3000. We used to have a jingle on the radio, so I have it memorized.
Very nice. Thank you very much. Commissioner Shull.
Yes, good evening. In 2022, Metro adopted a tip fee predictability strategy that at the time suggested annual rates ranging from 7.1% to 7.9% for 2022 through 2027. But last year's rate was set at 11%, which compounds over time. Will this year's rate take into account that last year's fee exceeded the fee predictability range?
That's a great question. We are currently in the budget proposal phase, so our Chief Operating Officer has not yet released her budget. It is up to council. They're the oversight committee and those that establish what the fee is. We're given the directions as a department to prepare a budget within the 8% increase, so that's what we have submitted. But ultimately, it will be up to council to set fees for next fiscal year, and I think the upcoming recommendations from the Waste Fee Policy Task Force that are in process right now will help inform that.
Okay. And could Metro provide some clarity on the cost drivers warranting these increases and how tip fee increases to date impact the fee predictability model going forward?
Yes, I'm happy to provide that. I'm not sure if you want me to use the time in
No.
in today's space, but I'm happy to do that.
Maybe you can get it to me, Mark Shull at clackamas.us, and I can share it with others. And I'm happy to hear that you're going to discuss this issue again with MPAC, I think you said in May. Will there be
July.
Oh, July, okay. Will there be engagement with elected officials in the region regarding the establishment of the fiscal year 24-25 tip fee?
So right now this year we have been hosting budget roundtables that invites local governments, nonprofits, and industry stakeholders into the development of our budget. We have an additional round of stakeholder roundtables coming up this April, so I'm happy to get that information to you. We have a interested parties list that you can sign up where I send regular updates out on opportunities for engagement. So there will be that opportunity to discuss the budget, and then Metro Council will also hold public hearings that local governments as well as community members are welcome to testify in and hear more information about the budget process.
All right, very good, thank you. I'll encourage county staff and residents to look in on that roundtable in April. Thank you very much.
Very good. Next, we'll go to Director Pre-Grigsby, please.
So I'm with a special district in Multnomah County, and we have several large medical institutions.
Director Rigsby, could you speak into the mic?
My question refers to medical facilities and educational residential campuses like Portland State University. And I know that the, heart of what we're trying to do is reduce the waste that ends up at in our landfills. So I'm curious to what extent Metro is working with those medical and educational institutions and large campuses to reduce their waste stream, and if that's at all part of this process, or if that's completely separate, but what's happening with that?
That's a great question. So, and I might, overall, we do work with institutions that I would put the educational campus that you mentioned, as well as special waste. And we do that in partnership with cities and counties as a part of our waste reduction efforts. So that also includes city and county staff that provide direct technical assistance to help support waste reduction efforts, anything from recycling or opportunities for waste prevention. So we can help provide information on local contacts. So we have staff across the region that provide those services. In terms of special waste, that's really a unique area. Metro does provide oversight for the handling of that, but that, I'm happy to get more information for you on that, because I think it's a little bit more unique with our compliance and regulatory staff.
Very good. Thank you, Luis Nava.
Yes, Luis Nava, representing the citizens of Washington County. I will echo Mayor Callaway's concern about the diversity in the events or the outreach events that you provide. Because in the past, I remember seeing another projects when the outreach events to the community didn't show the participation. So back in those times, I was asking for accountability for the money that we expend, in trying to do those outreach. You just show in a couple, well, 2 events, one with the Latinos, that it was only 3 Latinos there, and the other one was in the Native American or Indian Americans. You didn't show any picture. So being around for a long time, I don't know. I know what does mean when you don't show pictures, or the pictures are very small in participation. That's why I asking for accountability with those organizations that we bring, those funds to do the work that we're supposed to get into the community.
Very good. Appreciate that. Any response to that?
Well, just on the photos, we didn't have photos of the virtual meetings that we held, which was an oversight, but just isn't, I'm not used to that, not part of my process, so I added it to the list. But yes, I think your feedback is very important, and I appreciate the nod towards accountability, so thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Seeing no additional hands.
I see, actually, sorry.
Oh, do we have a hand up?
Vice Chair Sherman. Yes, we have Mayor Tim Rosner and Mayor McGriff both have their hands up.
Oh.
And for folks on Zoom, just so you know, if you have your camera off, your video does not appear for anybody in the audience or on our screens in the room.
Very good. Mayor Rosner, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Marissa and Marta, for the presentation today. Super helpful. I did get a chance to see it once before with the Metro Mayors Consortium, so I won't repeat some of the questions I had in there. But I do want to echo and just expand on a point that Mayor Callaway and Luis were making in terms of outreach. I think we all know the surveys you got aren't scientific. They're based on folks showing up. And I think it's really important when we're talking about the type of rate increases that we're talking about here, that we really reach out to the community and the people that are going to be paying those rates and get feedback from them in a more scientific manner to understand what's going on. I also, as we move forward, and Mayor Callaway touched on this, but I just want to expand on this thought a little bit, understanding the details and the costs, with a chance for certain stakeholder groups like mayors and haulers to interact and advise prior to decision making is really important. It's very complex environment out there, not just in terms of costs and can we afford the rates and are people going to accept those rates, but it's also the competition we have around us. For instance, if we have a self-haul station in South Washington County that's $35 for someone to go to, they're just going to keep going to Newburgh where they're only charging $23, right? So kind of understanding how all this is going to work and making sure we're setting up a system that people will actually use is really, really important and hard. I recognize that's very hard as well, and understanding how to pay for these things. Anyways, I'll just leave it at that, but I just want to make sure that's something we're looking at. Those two items we're looking at as we move forward.
Very good. Good comments. And good evening, Mayor McGriff.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Sherman. I just wanted to say that I thought the team did a great job on this. I must have missed the video at the Metropolitan Mayors Consortium, but I can't help but mention that I was having a flashback. So a few years back, a team led by SD Siegel at Metro, we had a group of very diverse constituents talking about how to relocate parts of Metro South. Almost all of the recommendations that came out of that study, even though Metro did not buy the property that we had recommended, are in this report. So in a way, I'm like, okay, didn't we already do this on a smaller scale? So I'm hoping that some of that work was involved in this particular study and that work did not go to waste. But I think that the recommendation about smaller facilities, our committee recommended taking the commercial part out of Metro South and allowing for more education and recycling, just as what's being recommended. So thank you for your work. I appreciate it.
Very good, very thoughtful comments. We appreciate that. Connor, anyone else with their hands up online?
No other hands.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just keep jumping in there, please.
Thank you. Well, I'm also going to be saying thank you to Mayor Callaway for bringing this up, and to just reiterate from Beaverton's standpoint, on two fronts. One is access for our residents to be able to, in close proximity, have facilities that they can take things to for recycling or reuse. As you said, if it's not going to be readily convenient for a lot of folks, it is going to just go in the garbage or down the drain. The other point that I wanted to mention is just the travel time for our local haulers to and from transfer facilities. I know transfer facilities is not towards the top of the list of the things of interest, but it is a key part, especially for as we get further and further out the center of the metro area, of just the cost that will ultimately get passed along to residents and our business owners for garbage, just simply because of the time it takes to get those garbage haulers where they need to go. So just want to point that out. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much for the comment. Okay, I'll take one last look around. Very good. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank
Good
you so much for the
information.
time this evening.
We appreciate you being here. We will move on to the next topic. It is the 2024 Urban Growth Management Decision, Draft Regional Population, Household, and Employment Forecast. You'll remember last meeting, or actually coming up, MPAC will be asking for advice on this decision in September. At our last meeting, we had a panel of demographers and economists speak to us about the factors they see influencing population and job growth. If I remember correctly, it's people are moving away and we're not procreating enough. So those are probably the two ththings we should work on. Tonight, picking up on that discussion, you'll hear from Metro staff about the Draft Regional Population and Employment Forecast. This draft forecast will be one piece of information to inform the 2024 Urban Growth Management Decision. So tonight, we've got Aaron Key, Ted Reed, Josh Herwood, and Dennis Yee. Very good. Please, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much, Councilor Sherman and the rest of MPAC. It's nice to see you all again. My name is Erin Key. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Urban Policy and Development Manager at Metro. So I've been before you many times. I might look different in 3D for those of you who are here at the office. It's nice to see you in 3D too. We are back, and I am here with several staff members from Metro, some of whom you've met and some of whom you have not, to share another part of important information that is going to help inform your future recommendations later this year about the urban growth boundary. Joining me today are Ted Reed, project manager, and then we have two guests, our economists from Metro, Dennis Yee and Josh Harwood, who we'll introduce in a little bit more detail in a couple of minutes. Go on to the next slide, please. I think it's important that we ground ourselves in why we're talking about the urban growth boundary and what the urban growth boundary is about. So we're going to make a habit of doing this at each meeting. We have a growth boundary because it has many important benefits for the region. It protects our high-quality farmland, forests, and natural habitats by focusing development where it makes the most sense and reduces our carbon footprint. Our urban growth boundary makes the most of land and the public infrastructure already in urban areas. By focusing development and redevelopment, it helps stretch limited public dollars and maintain and build the streets and pipes and roads that are important to supporting people who live in our region. It's important that we have intentional growth to help Portland be resilient to change. And we want people to come and stay here, and we know that they do because we have a very high quality of life. And I think our growth boundary contributes to that quality of life that we've enjoyed for a long time and want to continue enjoy for a long time. Next slide. You've seen this before. This is our schedule of activities, so I just want to point out where we are in it. There, you look for the little blue arrow right in the middle pointing up that says you are here. So last month, Ted and Dennis and I were here talking. We brought you a different set of special guests, and they included economists and demographers who were here talking about statewide trends and national trends to help you kind of think about and understand some of the dynamics that would be at play in this decision. So today, we're bringing our Metro economists who have worked on our regional forecast to focus specifically on the region and our estimates of its growth in the future. The Urban Growth Report is the collection of data information that is built to help MPAC and Council and CORE and others understand the pieces that are important to the UGB decision. It doesn't make a decision, it doesn't make a recommendation, it is the compilation of information. But we have been providing you pieces of information all along the process so that when you see it all together in one place, it won't be unfamiliar to you. But that report will come together at the end of June. So between now and June, we are going to be, like I said, slowly sharing this information. And this is kind of one of those first pieces. You get to see the results. We've talked a bit in the past about how we're going to do these things. Now you're going to start to see the results monthly between now and the publication of that report in June. Next slide. You've seen this one too, but another reminder of what goes into that urban growth report. We've talked about these three pieces: demand, capacity, and readiness. Today, we are here to give you important information about demand. The regional forecast is all about the demand for land based on growth in the region into the future, a long ways into the future, actually 20 years of growth projections. It's one piece of the puzzle. It isn't meant to reveal what you might want to do about the urban growth boundary, and you should not expect to have any ideas about that until we start to put all of the pieces together for you. And that's these other two pieces of the circle. That will take place over the next couple months, as I just said. As you recall, demand for land is based, oh, excuse me, I already said that. So yet to come, we'll talk more about capacity and what growth potential currently exists inside the growth boundary based on the analysis that we've explained to you how we're going to do. So we'll have those results coming up in the next couple of months. And we'll have information about city proposals for expansions. That's yet to come. Next slide. So just setting a little context for this regional forecast. It is a forecast and not a plan. I am a planner and Ted is a planner, but smart planners bring in experts when you need information and data to make good plans. This is that data and information. It's not the plan in of itself. It's a projection of what might happen, and it's produced by folks who focus on that kind of work, determining economic and demographic trends. We are lucky to have staff from Metro who have been doing this kind of work for a really long time. Dennis Yee has completed many regional forecasts for us, and the results have been remarkably accurate, particularly around the demographic trends. As you will see, Dennis took his work to a set of peers to seek their review and critique and adjust as appropriate, and that's what will be presented to you today. So I'll hand it off to Ted Reed, project manager and principal planner at Metro, to speak a little bit more about what the regional forecast is and what it will look like.
Thank you, Vice Chair Sherman. Thank you, MPAC members. So a little bit, if we can move to the next slide, please. A little bit more context. We are looking out 20 years, and so we want to be very clear that there is some uncertainty when we look out that far into the future about how much population and employment growth we might get, what income groups, what types of jobs might come. There are all sorts of factors that you all are aware of that can influence these things. Global events, pandemics that was not on our list last time we did this work, of possible things that can change the trajectory of growth. Innovations that we don't anticipate, like artificial intelligence, and what might that do to the mix of jobs in the future. So we deal with this uncertainty in a few ways. Aaron mentioned that we come back to this question at least every 6 years under state law, where we're required to do that. So we have an opportunity to check and see if we got it right last time around, or if we need to make some course adjustments as we're going. Second way we deal with uncertainty is that we conduct an expert panel review of the forecast, so that it's not just us talking to ourselves. We bring in folks from Portland State University's Population Research Center, the Oregon Employment Department, people like that, demographers and economists that can share their perspectives, so that we incorporate that. So you'll find in your packet a summary of that expert panel review that happened a few weeks ago. And the third way we deal with uncertainty is using a range forecast. This is a practice that we've been using since I've been working on growth management, originally in the 2009 Urban Growth Report. And it's really intended to recognize that uncertainty. We have what we call a baseline forecast that you'll hear about today, that is the most likely growth outcome. But we also have a high growth and low growth forecast to accompany that. A lot of the uncertainty, as you'll hear this time, comes from migration, which is going to become the source of population growth in our region in the next decade. You'll see some information about how migration trends bounce around year to year. We're going to show you the annual average, but there's uncertainty about whether that will continue to that extent. Next slide, please. You're also going to hear today about the forecast for a 7-county metropolitan statistical area, or the MSA. You may hear that acronym. It does extend into Washington State. We haven't gotten to the point yet of figuring out how much of this growth is coming to our urban growth boundary, shown in red on the map. So larger geography that we're talking about today, part of this growth management process will be to identify not only how much of the growth in the range we should plan for, but how much we believe is coming to our urban growth boundary. So moving on to our experts, Dennis and Josh.
I think it's on. Is it on? All right.
And I'll go ahead.
I get this one.
I didn't get to introduce you because you were
I wasn't here. That was my fault.
You were almost to the table, but so this is Josh Harwood. He's Fiscal and Tax Policy Manager at Metro, and Dennis Yee, the Metro economist.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, so what we'll do here is talk through a little bit of the results of what we're seeing here, but I want to talk a little bit about what's being forecasted here. So this is a range of outcomes. We're going to talk about a baseline forecast, but it's really a range of outcomes that we're talking about. The baseline you can think of as the most likely outcome based on long-term trends. This is not something that takes into account policy prescriptions or anything like that. This is a baseline to start from, to then advance other things to get to the urban growth report down the line. So the data we're showing here, data I think is important to know. It tells us what people do, but not really why. And so what I think for this portion of this, what we're trying to do is simply say, look, we're agnostic about a lot of these things. We're just saying, this is how the math runs. This is what we think will happen based on long-term trends. And so the biggest things when we're talking about this next slide, please. Let's just go to the next one real quick. And we're talking about growth components. We're talking about demographics. We're talking about population and migration. And so within that, we're talking about two components. We're talking about the natural rate of change. So think of natural rate, births minus deaths. It's the easiest way to think about it. It's just your existing stock population, how many people are leaving the population, and how many people are entering the population. And then migration is simply people moving into the area. That's a more common definition. So what you can see here is a couple of things. One is that net migration bounces around by decade quite a bit. And it's decades are kind of arbitrary, but this is instructive in that it's not consistent over time, and there's lots of factors that go into these things. So, but we can see some general trends. Amongst that is migration over the last 3 decades has shrunk a little bit. And it's shrunk for a variety of reasons likely. We're not gonna be able to tap one specific reason as to why that's happened. There's lots of reasons why that's happened. And so we can talk about some of those things. I'm happy to we can speculate a little, but I don't think that's probably the venue. This probably isn't the venue for that. I think natural change, though, I want to point out in particular, the last 3 decades has shrunk quite a bit. This is part of a national trend. Think about it as large demographic bubbles of cohorts of people. The way to think about it is we have a lot of elderly folks, baby boomer generation. They're moving into a point in time where they're not having kids, right? That whole population is not having kids, and the youngest populations are having kids a little later. So we're getting a situation where we're just not keeping up with the population growth unless we get a lot of migration, or not a lot, but unless we get some migration. So let's talk first about this natural change and about births and deaths, because I think that can be an important component of this. And I'll turn it over to Dennis to talk more about this. But Dennis, if you can go on the next slide, we can talk about births first.
Sure, thank you. So begin, this data comes from various sources, including the Oregon Health Department, the Washington Health Department, because we're a bi-state. It also includes data that that's been collected by the CDC for deaths that we'll talk about later. I'm just sort of giving you a backdrop what the data sources are. The Census Bureau, of course, is another strong data source. What you have before here is the birth rate assumptions. On the left chart, you see the age cohort of different birth rates for women of different ages. And over time, what the chart shows you is that birth rates, especially at the younger age, below 30 years of age, women are having fewer births. And the chart on the right is kind of a summary of it's what we call a total fertility rate chart. And it just says basically, on average, the average woman will have X number of kids in her lifetime. So historically, you see that in the 90s and early 2000s, that roughly worked out to about two kids per. And then after 2010-ish time frame, it just sort of started drifting lower, and it continued for the rest of the decade. And it continued even worse during the pandemic. So what you have on the right of the chart is my assumption on future fertility rates for the average woman going forward. Kind of think that there's going to be a little bit of bounce back post-pandemic, and then it more or less doesn't bounce back to where it was before. And that's pretty typical of the kind of well-educated, first world kind of area that we're populated in. You know, if this were a different country that's more of a third world, we'd see a different pattern. But this is the pattern that not only am I predicting, but also my colleagues at Portland State University, as well as the state demographer down in Salem. And if you talk to any demographer, most mainstream will say this is probably the condition. We're not going to see women having as many kids in the future as they had in the past.
Thanks, Dennis. Let's go quickly to the next slide. We'll have some time to talk about these too. I want to go make sure that everybody understands that. But let's go through some of the basics first, and then we can kind of talk about some details if people have questions. Dennis,
yeah,
talk a little bit about the deaths.
Thank you. as Josh introduced the notion, one key component of natural change, we just talked about birth, now we're going to talk about aging out, my euphemism for death. So I'm going to use the word aging out. It's a little kinder, I think. So what you have on the left on the blue chart line is just the number of deaths in total across all race and all ages over time for the MSA, the Metropolitan Statistical Area, which is that 7 county that my colleague Ted showed you on a map. And as you can see, the number of deaths have been rising historically over time. It's because our region's getting bigger, so then more people that pass on. But what you see is a pretty sharp inflection over the last decade roughly, and that sort of coincides with what my colleague here, Josh, mentioned about baby boomers and that cohort or that bulge beginning to age out. It's the leading edge of it, and that leading edge will continue for the next 20-odd years because that's the size of the baby boom generation, roughly about 20 years, 2 decades. And so we carry that sort of that trend forward, and it's not just a linear trend, it's actually somewhat curved because after a while, you age out and there's no more aging out, right? You're gone. And so we see that tapering off. And that reflects then, the next chart is, the assumptions on the next chart, some of it's history, some of it's my forecast, is the life expectancy. So that life expectancy plays into this death rate, the number of deaths and the death rate and so forth. And you see that over time, the life expectancy, because those curves, as they go down lower at any point, just means that your life expectancy is improving.
Great. Dennis, if we go to the next slide real quick, and we'll talk just about putting these two things together, right? So we're talking about putting the births and deaths together for natural rate, and where do we go with that then? You can see it in the chart here, what happens when we push it together. Again, long run trends. We don't see them changing immediately based on what we've seen so far. So Dennis, if you can talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, this chart unfortunately doesn't have a vertical line showing where the demarcation of the last history, but you can kind of guess where it is. The pandemic hit that spike down, and just a few years next to it will be the beginning of the forecast. So what we have here is basically a trend here that we think that the pandemic hopefully doesn't happen again. It's just short-lived, and so some of the birth and death rates factor that in as I showed. So we have actually a natural increase popping back up a little bit, but pretty much going forward through 2030, we have positive natural change, meaning the number of births subtracting deaths will continue to be positive. But then in early 2030, it flips. The number of deaths, so the more baby boomers and so forth passing out, and women eventually getting to the point where they're not having as many kids. So you get the flip side, and you have more deaths and births, and so the natural change actually brings down population, other things being equal, that is, we don't consider anything else.
Great. Let's quickly go on migration, and then we'll open up the group for some questions if they have them on demographics. But let's quickly talk about migration. I know this has been a topic frankly, it's fascinating, but I think it's interesting that it does bounce around very significantly from one year to the next. So when we're looking at a series like that bounces around and goes crazy like that, for our forecast purposes, a lot of times what we're doing is level setting the forecast. Because if you look at that, there's no way we're gonna be able to capture that kind of thing going forward. It's just not realistic. We're never gonna forecast exactly what the migration is in 1 year or the next. But over the long run, what we're trying to do is capture roughly what we think the migration will be. And so, Dennis, talk a little bit about how we arrived at where we got.
Sure. For reasons that, there are a lot of reasons why people move around, but one of the big ones is looking for a job. And so we see that the gray bars are hard to see on this, but represent periods that the National Bureau of Economic Research has identified as recessions. And you see in those gray areas that migration tends to swing lower. Not always all the time, but that's often the case. And that suggests then that there's business cycles. Business cycles influence migration and so forth. And as Josh mentioned, we don't try to forecast business cycles. That's nearly impossible to do. And so what do? We try to, as Josh said, we try to level set things. We try to say, what's the trend going forward based on some average sets of economic conditions, if you will. The dark line that's roughly between 10 and 20 is roughly about 15,000, has been the historical average for migration since the period left of the vertical dotted line. That's our history for the MSA.
And so when we talk about this stuff, I think there's a couple of components that I think are important that I know some people have talked about, and we want to talk about is affordability. Affordability is not a linear kind of, sorry to be too technical and economics, but it's not a linear impact, right? So cost of living can go up and not have a big change in the general population, and then it can tip over, and it's too expensive for the area, to support the area, those kinds of things, and have people migrate in because they have other options that are less expensive. And so for a long time, we've been less expensive than California and Seattle and all those things. That's still true. We're also a lot more expensive than Spokane and Boise and Salt Lake City still. And so there's a little bit of a dynamic here that we're trying to capture. There's other components to this too. Climate refugees is something that I know people have talked about quite a bit. We talked, I think, a little bit about it the last time we talked, but I think those kinds of things, climate refugees, a lot of, I don't have the right word for it yet, social migration, political migration, those kinds of things that happen because of lifestyles and those kinds of things that aren't really acceptable in certain places of the country for whatever reason. Those numbers are happening. We're seeing people come for those reasons. It's not showing up in the data enough to move the needle in terms of the sheer numbers. So we know that it's happening. We can talk about it a little bit, but I think the overwhelming factor is actually the cost of living. That people will have a harder time moving here after they go to graduate school, after they go to college, and speculatively moving here because it's just expensive. They need a job. And so it's a little different than it was 20 years ago where people could come and move and start at a coffee shop and eventually find their sales job or something like that here. It's a little bit of a different dynamic. So I just wanted to mention that real quick. We'll go to the next slide real fast on increasing diversity. This is no different than what you'll see in national statewide trends. It is a more diverse population. We expect that here as well. That factors into this as a qualitative factor. It's not necessarily fully quantitative into models, but we do know that it exists and we do model these things because we know that their impacts people's lives. Go.
Those are the 7 counties or metro?
7 counties,
okay.
I believe.
Yeah, everything is MSA for now.
Metro, there's a higher level.
Metro would be different, absolutely. That's a good point, thank you. Next slide, please. Dennis, really quick. This is our last slide on demographics, and then I know I'm trying to watch the clock a little bit. This is the population forecast that I mentioned that's range, right? So the middle line there is the most likely outcome based on long-run trends, without policy prescriptions, without any of those things. And what is unique about this is that, well, I'll let Dennis talk about it. Talk about the range. Go for it.
All right. As Josh hinted, the middle line is our baseline scenario. It's taking all the data that I presented earlier about births, deaths, and migration at that baseline level and just playing it out, just taking the base population and chunking it forward, aging it forward. Actually, demographers call it surviving that population forward. And so we've done that, and we get a growth rate that's significantly slower in the future than in our outlook than historically. Historically, about under 2%. Going forward, the first 10 years, about 0.6, and then of a percent annual rate. So that's like your APR, like, I wish our credit cards were only 0.6%, right? Kind of thing. But that's what I mean by an APR. And then the last 10 years of that baseline is closer to about 0.4. And this is in line with the state forecast. I think the state demographer came and talked to you about it. the PSU demographer said something like this. And if you look at the Census Bureau, they'll have numbers that are similar to this. We're just slightly above that, maybe 0.1% faster. And it sort of depends on which forecast you want to compare. Then we have the low growth forecast, and that's basically saying that migration is not adding anything to our population forecast. Remember, by the time 2030 rolls around, natural change is negative, meaning more deaths than births. So if you have even less migration projected, it's pretty much forces then your base population to tilt lower. And then the top level is more like sort of status quo in terms of growth rates of what we've had in the past. But I have to say professionally, I don't think that's those happy days, if you will, are not here again.
And on that happy note,
yeah,
let's open it up for questions on demographics if we can. I know we don't have a ton of time. We've got a handful of other slides to talk about employment, but I think this stuff is pretty important for this group. So we're open to questions.
Very good. I think, what I find really interesting, so you had mentioned climate refugees. I would guess that's still kind of early in the process. I mean, we're just seeing the edges of it, but probably impactful long term. One question, kind of more of an observation. So a lot of this seems intuitive to me. 100, 150 years ago, families had more kids. They worked their kids on the farm. People didn't live as long. As we get older, we had kind of the big baby boom population post-war that are now getting older, putting pressure on Social Security and Medicare, and starting to get into those older years. My question is what you're seeing regionally, is that consistent with the U.S., or are we a little bit of an anomaly here? Is this a little bit different here?
I think we both should probably answer this because we might have slightly different answers, and so that'll be instructive maybe. If you want, go ahead.
Well, as I say, so and the reason I asked that question is I think of the U.S. as more of a closed system versus just the region, as far as just movement of people. And so where I'm going with this ultimately is, as the older population passes on and the newer population is producing fewer children, but they're also living longer, do animals in a closed system return to a level of equilibrium over time? or are we on a trend that's not going in a good direction? That's my question.
I love that question. Like I said before, I think we'll both answer it probably a little bit differently. But Vice Chair Sherman, I think how I would answer that, and this is not prescriptive, this is just off the top of my head a little bit, is that your characterization of the borders is exactly right. And but that may not be as big an advantage here as it has been in the past because our cost of living is higher. So I would say that all of the natural amenities are still here, right? And yes, we still have all the great restaurants, all the good foods and beer and wine and all that stuff, right? All that stuff is still here, but it costs a lot more to get it now. And so I think relative to the rest of the country, if you want to talk about relative to the rest of the country, we're a lot more expensive now than we were 20 years ago relative to the rest of the country. And so I think demographically and those kinds of things, we're seeing the same things, but the cost of living will drive different decisions around people based on their incomes and their quality of life, or not their quality of life, their standards of living, for lack of a better term. So that's not a great answer, but that was kind of off the top of my head.
I don't disagree with my colleague here. I'll just emphasize that I think migration is going to be a big deal going forward. This is not, as my colleague said, this is not a plan. This is just me attempting to read the tea leaves as best as we can and whatnot. So I'm going to leave it just at that.
Okay,
Dennis, could you add, I think you asked to just how we compare to the national here in the region?
If I hear you correctly, from a birth and death rate perspective, we may not be that dissimilar from national observations, but from a migration perspective, could be very different.
I think that's a great characterization of it, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Mayor Callaway.
Thank you, Chair. A quick clarification in education.
I don't think so.
Migrant, the definition of migrant is somebody who moves at least once within 3 years cross district or city lines for a job in timber, agriculture, or fishing. But in the report, when the term migrant is used, that's just anybody who's moving. Is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
And that's not internally. Like if you move from Clackamas to Washington, I don't count you as a migrant.
Right.
Okay, that's just internal migration or internal
That's a good
movement.
point. Good
Okay,
clarification.
so migration, net migration, as we use it here, is someone who is different, did not live here before, ever. And now they've decided to settle here. But then there's people who leave this region, this MSA, and don't come back. And so the net is just the difference between that.
Perfect. Okay, so, you know, Hillsborough and a lot of our cities, you know, just use PSU's, Population Center Research, and they have Washington County growing at 0.96%. Metro has it at 0.4%, which could be either anywhere between 9,000 at the 0.4% growth or 23,000 at PSU's 0.96. So how are those figures reconciled, or how does Metro factor in, you know, different forecasts?
You must be referring to figures that were in the 2018
Yeah, I think
distributed forecast or
you're
2019?
talking about the results from the previous urban growth boundary decision.
Because I will be happy to answer that if that is okay,
Well, let's talk, I think,
but maybe you want further
I think it's
clarification.
important to point out what the geography of this projection that we're presenting today, and then what it looks like at the end of the process, which are the numbers that you have from 2018. Because this is the 7-county area. And so, let me see, I was going to ask Ted to answer this, but I have to slowly move the microphone over here. Okay, there we go. He'll do that.
Thank you, Mayor Callaway, for the question. So yes, Aaron is alluding to a process that we go through where we start out with this regional forecast at the 7-county level. In the growth management decision, the council decides, based on MPAC's advice, how much of that we plan for in our urban growth boundary. And then after that growth management decision, we go through what we call our distributed forecast process, where we work with all of our local jurisdictions to figure out how much of that regional growth is going to go to each jurisdiction, county, city. So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I suspect that that's what you're looking at is from that distributed forecast process from the last growth management decision.
Yes, and this is the projection out through 2043.
Okay.
And I can circle back.
Yeah.
Okay, rather than confuse everybody else, we can just be confused, okay?
We should be able to figure it out.
That'll make it easier on everybody.
Yeah, and the point too is that this process is updating those numbers. So we do them for a 20-year span, but we update it every 6 years to keep it on track.
Good. And, you know, Ted, you mentioned kind of I guess what I would call a little bit of sub-regional work. And we really like that idea of the sub-regional, you know, forecasting as well, beyond just, you know, just the 7-county and as well as the metro area. So thanks.
Very good. Connor, anybody online?
Yes, Mayor Tim Rosner.
All right, please, Mayor McGriff.
And we could take the presentation down
Yeah,
temporarily.
you can take it down if you want right now.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor Rosner.
Thank you. Just kind of a follow-up on Mayor Callaway's question. In Sherwood, I'm really interested in how this progresses with the local jurisdictions. And I'll give you an example in Sherwood. Our school systems actually specifically do not use the Portland State University estimates because they have not been accurate. You know, the demographic pattern that we see in our cities is young family with kids moves in, kids go through the school system, graduate, leave, parents leave, and new young family moves in. So we kind of buck the trends. And in terms of how this gets tweaked from a local perspective and how it's used from a local perspective will be could you talk a little bit more about how that process is going to work? Because obviously we have at the local level, it's different, right? Just like the Portland metro area is different when you look at different regions of the nation.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm going to start just with a reminder that for this purpose, for a purpose of helping MPAC and council make a UGB decision, our requirement is to look at the region's growth and make a decision about the needs of a growth boundary expansion based on the needs of the region as a whole. So that is what we're aiming to do in this process. But through that, when Metro Council and MPAC make recommendations and a decision at the end of this year is when that allocation, also that discussion and decision about what growth is inside the boundary occurs. I can let Ted speak to the specifics, but it is the actions that follow that UGB decision and then that provide individual jurisdictions with that information, to the best of our ability. Go ahead.
So yes, we will undertake that forecast coordination work with cities and counties after this growth management decision. It inevitably involves a lot of back and forth with your staff, local planners, to figure out what those numbers should be. And it ultimately gets adopted by the Metro Council. In the past, we've brought those distributed forecasts to MPAC as well for review. So we'll do that again, but not until 2025.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I just want to kind of raise it. I know I've talked about it before in some of these meetings and in the stakeholders group as well. But I think it is an important issue, that we need to be looking at. And just one last quick question. In terms of how this report gets used, because, the way if I understand it correctly, the way you're putting together this data is basically based on current conditions and how we see things moving forward. There's another side of this coin, which is where do we want to be and how do we get there? So if this, in a state where it's important for us to be growing as cities because of how our property tax system works. When our property tax is limited to 3% growth a year, we have to grow the assets, i.e. housing and jobs in our cities to grow our tax base just to keep up with inflation. So is the report going to have information about what are the underlying key drivers, and as policymakers, what can we be doing to reverse some of those trends, bring the types of jobs we need to the region, et cetera, et cetera? If you could if I'm getting too far ahead here, just let me know. We can save it for another meeting.
No, I think that's a really good question. It is important to understand that the urban growth report is meant to be a tool for this urban growth boundary decision to provide the data and information and projections. So it is primarily a report of data and information that is the most accurate that we can present, and that then the decision-making and that policy-making becomes the task of MPAC and council. As Ted pointed out, the data will be presented in ranges, and that's where the magic happens of our elected officials like yourself, having discussions with one another about where you think it falls in that range and why, and then to work together with each other to make a decision about the urban growth boundary decision. So the UGR is primarily data-based, is my answer. It will have some of those factors, but the policy conversations need to be something that happen and continue after that UGB decision.
I thank
Into
you,
and through.
I
I
appreciate
guess that's
that.
the right way to say it. Into the UGB decision and through it.
No, and I appreciate it because it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, and I get that, but thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, I think we should continue into economics and job growth so we can make sure to talk about that a little. I know it'll be of interest to you.
Please. Do you have additional slides?
We do.
Please.
Okay, thank you. Can we bring back the slides? There's one that says,
We're a little low on time, so we're happy to come back if we need to talk about this stuff. But I think if we get the slides back up, that would be great, and we can try and go quickly through some high-level stuff. It's a lot of the same story. It's just about jobs rather than people, for lack of a better term. Slides coming up?
Yep, they are up on Zoom. Hopefully we'll get them.
There we go. All right, I will do these real fast just so that we can advance it, and then Dennis can answer some questions if you have them. If we could get the bar off the screen, that'd be great. The employment to population ratio, this labor force participation, what we're showing here is essentially roughly half of the people work that live in an area. So what we're seeing over time is bounces around a little bit, and then over the long haul, though, we're expecting it to even out to about where it's been historically. We don't think that there's any reason to think that this ratio is going to change dramatically from where it is now. And so with that, let's just turn over this to the next slide quickly, please, and look at kind of the overall employment forecast. Again, you'll see this similar kind of thing. It's a little narrower range. There's more variability with the numbers of people than there are number of jobs. That's simple. The low end, again, contemplates a flatter or negative growth rate that we haven't really seen before in these things. So I want to make sure that we highlight that that's a little bit different than what we've seen in the past. Let's go on to the next slide real quick, and I'm going to stop there, and we're going to talk about this slide a little bit, and if we have questions, we can end there if we need to. This is a slide of the sectoral breakdowns of the employment forecast. So the industries, these are what is known as North American Industrial Classification Codes. They're NAICS codes, and so they're not going to be perfectly analogous to how everybody thinks those jobs would qualify. So if, as an example, the athletic and outdoor apparel industry here in the region is, we're the Silicon Valley of that. And so it falls into a variety of these categories, that industry does. And so when we look at studies around a specific industry or high tech or something like that, we're going to look at individual studies, and we're going to slice those categories and take even smaller portions of them in order to put together an industry breakdown for an industry. So an industry-wide thing in terms of things like high tech here. If we talk about the high tech industry, that actually comprises a whole bunch of people in a whole bunch of categories. And so this is an overall look. It's kind of where we think it's happening. It's where we think of employment, the national story, and kind of the shorthand is ed, med, and a hotel bed. So education, right? So a lot of education. We've got lots of kids coming through the system, not necessarily in our region, but in the system in general. We've got lots of aging population that needs a lot of health care. We don't have the healthiest population to begin with, so it needs a lot of health care. And then we've also got hotel beds, so leisure and hospitality, right? So we've gone through leisure hospitality. We have a variety of reasons why that occurs, but those things are the things that are the big drivers when we think the shorthand version of when we talk about these things. You'll notice transportation warehousing at the bottom. That's something that's been reviewed, and we've talked about it quite a bit. I will tell you that is an industry ripe for mechanization, and it's already done that to some extent. So when we think about the industry, it can be huge, but not have as many people in it. And so I would just kind of caution that when these things can be kind of taken in a vacuum without some proper context. But this is the general section. This is a general breakdown of what we see. Another way to think about it is we've gone from building stuff to servicing people, things, to providing accounting, legal services, financial services, leisure and hospitality, education. These are not all low-paying jobs. They include, I would guess most of us in this room technically are service sector employees. So I think when we talk about these things, that's where I'll leave it for now. I think we're just about at time, but I want to leave a little time for questions. Sorry, I tried to go that as fast as I could.
Very good, thank you. So if I may summarize, so population growth, job growth, modestly positive, but more subdued with a greater potential for negative outcomes over time.
I need to bring you with me every presentation. Yes, absolutely.
Just trying to pick up on it. Very good. We've got time for a couple questions if we have any. Wow, you wowed them.
I talk real fast sometimes, sorry.
Tim's got his hand up.
Oh, does he? I'm sorry. Mayor Rosner, please.
Oh, thank you. Not a question, but I don't know what the temperature of the rest of the room is, but I feel like this section needs more conversation. If we could bring it back maybe to the beginning of the next meeting for maybe like 10 or 15 minutes. I know, because we're right at the end of the meeting here.
Well, I personally love this stuff, so you can bring it back as often as you'd like, but yeah, I'm sure we could find more time for this, absolutely.
Yeah, we're planning on coming back to you. We have a plan to come back with the capacity analysis. So if you remember the circle I showed you, the 3 elements, this is all about demand. We're ready to talk about capacity results, which I think you will all find very exciting also. So we can come back with that and save some time to revisit this, but we'll be here and ready to talk about whatever you want to.
Very good, thank you very much. I do see another hand up, I can't tell who that is, and I apologize.
It's Pam. Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you. I just want to address the issue of coming back to this. We will be having our next organizational meeting for MPAC, Brett, and we'll make sure that we get it on at the next meeting for Tim and for the rest of us. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. I appreciate that feedback. Thank you for the presentation. Very good information, and you rattled it off quickly, so well done. I think that takes us to the top of the hour. I'm just looking around the room.
Drop the gavel.
Anything else?
60 seconds to spare.
We are good. Our next meeting is Wednesday, March 27th. We will see you all there, and at that point, we are adjourned. Be safe. Have an enjoyable evening.